You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Nation. I want to get a little dynamic today. We have Sam Miller on the podcast from Proteus Motion. I don't know if you guys are social media fans or Kansas City Chiefs fans, but there's a good chance that if you're both, you've seen Patrick Mahomes using a machine that looks like a throwing machine. And when I originally saw it, I was like, fuck no. I don't need to see another machine that's mimicking sport-specific movements entering the market. We got reached out to. I got sent a bunch of press on the Proteus Motion. And as I dug more and more into it, I realized that there was some genius and some really interesting application that I just glossed over because I hate the idea of doing sport-specific training in the weight room. You do GPP, we do strength, we do this, and then you let athletes go out and do what athletes do, which is go out on the field and crush people. So as I started looking at this technology and more importantly, transverse plane and rotation and the ability to measure, there was a diagnostic element to this machine that I have not seen anywhere else. So as we set up the podcast and I was doing the research, kind of preparing for it, I was more and more impressed. Had Sam come on and discusses not only the origins of technology and how they're using this technology to not only quantify data, but looking at trends over time, imbalances from right to left with different rotation, and just a endless amount of movements that are only limited by the creativity of the coach. So as we get into this discussion, I think I went from a skeptic, non-believer to somebody that would like to give it a try. So I want you guys to buckle up, take a honest look at this technology, and let me know what you think. So Mr. Sam Miller, Proteus Motion. Hey, Sam, thanks for coming to Power Athlete Radio. Proteus Motion. Give me some background, give me some origin story. Let me know how this thing came about, and more importantly, your background, and more importantly, why are you the one to bring this to market?
Good question. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk about this today. Proteus Motion, really unique, differentiated tool that's primarily for the measurement of strength and power. And secondarily is a new form of resistance training using something that we call 3D resistance. It's constant resistance, constant force in all planes and directions. So it's both a performance testing tool and a resistance training tool. The genesis for Proteus is really I grew up outside of Boston. I was an athlete growing up, played every sport under the sun. My main sport was soccer, though. This is in and out of physical therapy and training from age 9 to 14 with a super painful condition in my knee. And I remember walking out of a training session with a teammate who was recovering from a oblique tear. And we each had a sheet of paper that had the same training program on it. And this kind of exposed to me some of the limitations in personalization. And where that led me was a realization that this is not an issue necessarily with the trainers, coaches, clinicians, who I actually found to be excellent, but it was around access to data around one of the most important pillars of human performance, which is physical strength and power. And as you know, strength is your ability to move against a force, right? So if you are trying to evaluate strength, for example, for a multi-planar movement, you need multi-planar forces. And that's not something that exists. You can't, you can't get a multi-planar force from a cable machine, which is a rope, because the force or the resistance is coming from one direction, the source of the rope or the cable. So as you're moving through multiple planes of motion, the force is not matching or mirroring the direction of your movement, and therefore it's physically impossible to get a reliable or meaningful measurement for a rotation, for example. So fast forward to kind of 20 years, I went to Vanderbilt. I studied economics and history. Got into engineering from there, and realized with this like explosion of the connected fitness space that all these other companies were kind of digitizing existing pieces of equipment, like put a sensor on a bike, put a screen on a cable machine, which was not solving this problem around strength measurement. So I realized we have to create a new machine altogether that provides constant force. And so I took something that my dad actually had invented it in the early 90s and spun out of MIT, and developed kind of in the basement of my house growing up, like a mad scientist. And then abandoned this brilliant mechanical system. And I took that 25 years later, and used that as the basis of, if I redesign this and create a new machine, we're going to create resistance in all planes and directions that's constant. It feels like kind of moving through a fluid, right? Or a force field, and then build software around it. And that led us to where we are today. So today we've got Proteus system. We've got close to 500 installations with commercial gyms, sports performance facilities, pro and college sports teams, physical therapy, and chiropractic businesses. We have about 75,000 users that range from age 8 to age 98. And that includes some of the best athletes in the world across all major sports. And these businesses that we work with, they use Proteus to deliver precision fitness, physical therapy, and athletic training services. And the users of all kind of ages and demographics use Proteus because it's the fastest way to get hyper-personalized insights about your progress, areas of strength and weakness, what to work on, and ultimately to move better and feel better. So it's a very unique tool. We've like rolled this into a software product where you can test strength and power across the entire body, with standardized tests that we have built. So like you can go through 15 movements, for example, one of our standardized tests in 5 minutes, and it will tell you your biological power age. It will compare you to our data set of 1 billion data points, where you stand against someone like you, and imbalances, areas of strength, weakness, what to work on, and even a new feature outputs hyper-personalized multi-week training programs.
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Are you a field or court sport athlete looking to dominate the leaderboard? Let me introduce you to Field Strong. Take your inner athlete to the next level by exposing yourself to the advanced training techniques that contributed to my 10 years in the NFL. Unlock pinnacle performance and level up your athletic potential today. Head to powerathletehq.com/fieldstrong and claim your 7-day free trial. Now back to the show. Wow. So what are we seeing? Like, obviously you said there's 500 units, 75,000 users. You have pro athletes. What's the, I don't know, like a time of adaptation? So if I come in and I've never used the machine, obviously there's going to be a learning curve. One of the big holes that I've assessed in the fitness industry is really just people's understanding of how to move, especially trying to stress athletes with like transverse plane. Like, how do you work rotation with athletes? And you see people, like you said, at the gym using a cable, and it's always awful and it looks stupid. And I recommend nobody does that, and especially watch people do it. It's dumb. If anything, using bands is a little bit better. But to be able to do it dynamically, you're going to have to use med balls, and you're going to need something reactive, and you're going to need to be coached, because very few people understand bilateral, unilateral, staggered stance, all these different positions. So to be able to have this done in almost kind of real time, where you can now see where somebody's output is on different positions, it's pretty interesting. With that, obviously they go through a diagnostic, and then you design a training program. Is there like what's the learning curve on this stuff? And more importantly, how can somebody go from unadapted to adapted and really just proficient in an amount of time?
A great question. So, I mean, we're talking about, so let's talk about like the trainer or the coach first, because what we recommend is initially that this is introduced to athletes or users with supervision initially. And it depends on the individual, but usually after a session or two, it can be used independently to the extent that individual athletes or users can get our mobile app and just scan the QR code, log in, and do whatever they want. You can control the screen with buttons on the handle controller. So it's actually really, really intuitive. But we really focus on when we do an install, we have a full customer success team that does the onboarding and education. And this is an area that we've made great strides in over the last couple of years, realizing that the ongoing support and education, there's a great hunger for with our client base and our user base for kind of peeling back the layers of Proteus. And so what we've done is we've developed a structure, an infrastructure that supports that. We have a 15-minute learn the basics of Proteus you can do on your phone. That's just the basic operational stuff. Super, super easy. There's one on-off button, right? Turn it on. The whole thing's kind of automated. But it really comes down to the application and the implementation of it. That's where what we like to say is, while we are developing something that is under the hood unbelievably advanced, we've got a dozen patents across the board on this. We try to make this super easy because at the end of the day, nobody has time to learn anything new. Yeah. And we learned this the hard way. I think one of our first commercial installs was in 2018, and we were so excited about, we've really developed and patented the first ever way to be able to quantify power for a multiplanar movement, for any human movement. And we were super excited about, okay, we got this new data and people are going to love it and this and that. And we got it out into the field and nobody cared. This is in 2018. We realized if you don't know what it means, if you don't have a reference, if you don't know, hey, are my 400 watts for a shot put movement, is that good, right? For my demographic, is it not good? And over the years, we've improved the software so it's unrecognizable from what it used to be, and that's one of the benefits of getting a Proteus. Is this is an investment that appreciates over time. But now it's to the point where a novice trainer, it kind of elevates them to become a mid or higher level trainer, because in 5 minutes or less, you're able to do a full assessment that gives you information that immediately tells you just very clear, well-designed numbers of where do you stand, how do you compare, how are you improving, what to work on, and why.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show. Have you found it? Oh, sorry. There's a slight delay on Zoom, so I'm not trying to talk over you. So people on the internet that are listening to this are going to freak out. But as I'm looking at this, the one thing that's interesting is, and we've dealt with this for a number of years, is trying to convince the population, the general population, that if they use performance markers as indicators for health and longevity, they're much farther than anything else that the fitness industry is pushing them. Hypertrophy is also, important, but putting on muscle and losing body fat seem to be the majority driver for anybody that's doing any form of training. That's why, the GLP-1s and Ozempic and semaglutide and all them are so popular, because people are like, I just get to lose body fat. And even though that's probably at the expense of lean body mass, they're still able to do it. So being able to convince the population that health and wellness are tied to performance, strength, and more importantly, explosive power. And I defined power years ago as your ability to display your strength dynamically. So finding interesting ways to do it with either a standard kettlebell swing, med balls, throws, anything that looks like dynamic movement, things that you can't do slowly, like jumping up on a box, And these are always been difficult, especially for people in aging populations who are so worried about hurting themselves, where, now they've been taught that, and a big part of this problem is you have to do this thing through an entire life cycle of existence. So you do these things as kids, and then all of a sudden people hit like 20 something and never sprint again. They never do anything dynamic, and they just move slow and careful until they die. And I think that's one of the quickest ways to the grave. So what I was impressed by actually watching the videos and going through all the social and everything is that people can actually do dynamic movements in safe ways where they're probably not going to hurt themselves because because the machine technically limits you to what you can do.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a couple things there that I want to react to. If you're spot on about this from a resistance training standpoint, because Proteus is not just a performance assessment tool. Businesses bring Proteus in primarily because it solves the problem of, if you care about strength and power, right? We do the measurement of that, right? And we do it super, super efficiently, precisely, and in a way that we like to say it would take 20 pieces of equipment in a lab and 3 hours of time to do 10% of what we do in 5 minutes, right? So they bring us in to solve that piece, and it plays very well with these other measurement tools, whether it's for, cameras for biomechanics or force plates. We're kind of like a force plate for rotation or multiplanar movements, if you will. But we cover the strength and power component. But secondarily, the invention of what we call 3D resistance. 3D resistance is constant force. It's a new modality. It's constant force, no matter what speed or direction you move. It feels like moving through a force field or a fluid, right? And this enables two things. One is constant force throughout a range of motion enables the measurement of power and strength throughout any, multiplanar movement. That's one. The second thing is that it provides this very unique training benefit or stimulus. And what we say is, as a training tool, Proteus is one of your tools in your toolkit.
Sure.
As a measurement tool, it's the ultimate tool for measuring strength and power. But as a training tool, it has a very unique and special place on the force velocity curve, and it's the ultimate tool for developing triplanar power and speed, right? So how it's used is as a training tool is this 3D resistance. We've done research with some of our early partners. Well, actually, one of our early collaborators turned customer turned investors, a group called the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York. It's the #1 orthopedic hospital in the country. And they did a study using surface EMG and fine wire in 8 different shoulder muscles, 5 different movements performed that are shoulder exercises, compared with doing those on Proteus, a set resistance, the same resistance with a free weight, and the same resistance with a cable machine. And what they found is that Proteus's constant resistance throughout an entire range of motion, including the end ranges without any inertia, produces up to 95% greater peak muscle activation throughout a range of motion than a free weight or a cable machine, and up to 87% higher muscle activation duration. So it creates this neuromuscular stimulus that is, it's completely unique, and super effective, and it's almost entirely concentric. It is basically entirely concentric. The only eccentric part of it is you experience through deceleration. So it has its very unique place as a training tool, and it's one of the ways that Proteus is used at the facilities that we are in, the close to 500 facilities. Proteus is used anywhere from 200 to 1,000 sessions per month, so it is frequently used. And when a training program is built for somebody, it usually involves Proteus for certain kind of dynamic movements. And back to your point about the learning curve, because it's so unique, it is, I'll give you an example. The first time Patrick Mahomes ever used Proteus, even a guy like Mahomes doing a trunk rotation, he kind of rocked back onto his heels, right? He doing a trunk rotation movement. We started to coin this term. It's like we call it the Proteus stumble. And it's like when you are not used to having to produce force from the ground up and engage your core, Proteus doesn't let you cheat, right? And so it forces you organically to take an athletic stance, to engage your entire body to produce any movement. And it's upper body, lower body. I mean, it's you can perform an infinite number of movements on it. Um, Once you get over this hurdle, which, for someone like Mahomes took about 15 seconds, for others might take a 5-minute session for it to click. Then it becomes really addicting because it's the kind of thing where it's one of my favorite tools to use because it's hyper engaging. It is incredibly effective. And as it relates to power production, I think you hit the nail on the head with this is a really interesting moment in time where I think both strength and power is no longer confined to bodybuilding and elite athletics. Power, for example, is now a biomarker. And if you're familiar with there's a new term, I think there's a study that came out in mid-January, the term powerpenia, like sarcopenia.
Yeah.
Right. And it relates to power loss over lifespan effectively. And it's we have done recently an analysis of more than 1 billion data points that we've captured. Like last year alone, we captured I think 150,000 performance tests that were done from tens of thousands of unique individuals. And we've started to do some analysis on this to look at what does it show us from a macro standpoint in terms of how does power change as you age? And some of the insights that we found from that are unbelievable, and they're truly groundbreaking.
No, I read this
that.
study, and it was I think power and dynamic strength peaks in let's say your mid 20s, and then it kind of tapers off, and then about the age of 40, I think it's 10 to 13% a decade. And then at age 60, it's 18 to 20%, and then it just kind of fucking crashes. I think that's the way it works.
Interesting. It's so one of the things that we looked at was does the data that we have, does it mirror the existing research that's out there? And the existing research that's out there is strength and power basically roughly decline 10% every 10 years you age, right? And we found that our data set kind of matches that from a high level standpoint. But one of the many interesting things that we found is that there's a big difference between men and women.
Yeah.
And we found that for men, from age 30, basically, age 30 is about the peak. There's a steady decline, roughly 9 to 10% per decade. Women, on the other hand, they peak a little earlier in their 20s, and there's much less of a decline until they're about 60 or 70 years old, at which point there's a steep drop off. So basically by their 70s, women have a less steep decline and then a drop off in their 70s. They lose about 53% of their power by their 70s from their peak, whereas men have a steadier decline without that drop off, and they lose a total of about 40%, which is a big difference between men and women. And then we've double clicked into that and looked at, well, how does that differ by movement or movement type? And that's where it gets really interesting, because I think one of the things that Proteus is doing is really challenging some of the norms. I mean, we view this as a paradigm shift in our ability to understand human performance, not just as you age, but what are the movement types that by demographic should be focused on. And the answers that we've come up with they differ from, I wouldn't say traditional thought, but they differ from traditional practice. So an example would be you see a lot of these sagittal plane type movements being done from both especially on the strength standpoint. It turns out that those are the movements that are the least deficient, no matter what demographic you look at.
Well, if you look at just human movement, right? So from sitting to walking, everything's in a sagittal plane. I mean, we just got done watching the CrossFit Games, which is basically a homage to bilateral hip hinging in a sagittal plane. That's all, I mean, that's the entire thing. Everything can be done in the doorway. The problem is athletics is, and more importantly, athleticism is not done in the doorway. One of the observations I made many, many years ago playing in the NFL is the greatest athletes on the planet have the ability to do one thing: separate the upper body from the lower body. Think about a receiver sprinting down the line, rotating his upper body, catching the ball. And so one of the hallmarks of athleticism, and, I played offensive line, offensive tackles, set back, sitting vertical, rotate the upper body to be able to punch. Quarterbacks plant their feet and rotate. So that rotation key is one of the deciding factors of whether or not you play at a high level or you become just another nobody. And the people that can't separate the upper body from the lower body and are glued are dramatically less athletic than those people that can. So unless you're doing something like, and I'm not saying that people that run, that sprint are unathletic, but I remember watching Usain Bolt run, probably the fastest human in the modern world. And it wasn't until I clicked on YouTube and watched a video of him playing soccer that I knew he was by far one of the best athletes on the planet. I knew he could run, but I've seen people that were fast in straight lines that weren't necessarily athletic. I mean, that happened all the time. They bring in some guy into training camp. This guy runs like a 3.940. The guy runs in a straight line. The minute that he gets deflected, he can't redirect. So, I mean, I'm watching Usain Bolt play soccer and he's tearing people up. I'm like, that dude's an incredible athlete because he's rotating, he's moving his limbs independent. But that, I think there's a little bit of canary in the coal mine for people's outside kind of observations, and more importantly, the narrative they've been pushing. For many, many years, we've told people to not lift weights and to not train because it's going to break your knees down, it's going to hurt your back, and you have a sea of physical therapists and doctors that have no background in lifting weights and don't understand how it works. We deal with tens of thousands of people a day, and the amount of PTs, doctors, and allegedly orthopedic surgeons that have no foundation in lifting weights and understanding how it works, like arthritis. If you continue to load the joint, the arthritis doesn't get worse. If you do unload the joint, you don't do anything, arthritis gets worse. So, I mean, it's almost now we're in this interesting revolution where people are realizing that if you want to live a long, healthy life, you have to be a strong organism. And the only way that you're going to become a strong organism is you have to stress the organism, you have to lift weights, you have to step, squat, and lunge, do rotation, all these things, and you have to train as an athlete. I remember Rob Wolf told me a few years ago that, because I help Rob with this programming because he does jits and I do jits. And we were just talking and he's like, you figured out the greatest hack on the planet for longevity is training people like lifelong athletes. Because you all of a sudden get to this point in life where, hey, I'm no longer an athlete. I need to stop training athletically. Now I'm just going to go sit in a machine and just push in these, planes of motion that are fixed based upon the designer and the engineer for the machine. And all I'm going to do is try to be as lean as possible, put on as much muscle, but never doing anything to stress the nervous system, rotation, and all these other key factors. So the idea of being a lifelong athlete, I think, is a greater indicator for longevity than anything we've seen. And the problem is the paradigm is broken.
Yeah.
I mean, what you guys have done is pretty intelligent, pretty ingenious, where now you're looking at like quantifying this and showing people all you have to do is design it into a training program, which is inclusive and holistic. You said that there's no eccentric load. You need to drive some form of eccentric. So, I mean, there's probably a concurrent training program that looks like post-activation potentiation or just something concurrent where you're doing something heavy, using a barbell, using some form of, implement to load, and then doing something dynamic, which is, the foundation for athletic training.
100%. And I think that, I mean, and before Proteus, of course, like the scientific foundation already exists that says that, once you build foundational strength, you keep it for a long time.
Yeah.
Power, on the other hand, if you use it or lose it.
Yeah.
And it's something that you have to train constantly.
Yeah.
Right. And that means training at a higher speed, right? Higher velocity, and typically a lighter load. But what's really key though is how do you know what movements to do that for and when? Proteus helps identify that in a matter of minutes. And we have a feature in the software that kind of does force velocity profiling across the entire body and will tell you where each of these movements falls and then what are the implications. So would you need to train strength, right? And you need to train at 0 to 0.75 meters per second for these movements. Do you need to train power? Do you need to train, explosiveness and acceleration? We find that basically most movements people have foundational strength for. I mean, now our user base skews more athletic than the general population, but the fastest growing demographic we have is 30 to 60-year-olds, and we've got a really fast growing database there that's yielded some incredible insights. But some of these things are just key, which are that, again, I think rotation is one of the most, everyone knows I think most people know it's important.
Yeah.
But the extent of to which it's important, I think is kind of underrated in the sense where you look at like walking involves rotation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, you have to swing. You watch people, they kind of like walk like robots. It's almost like their hips are glued. But
exactly.
So many years ago when I was a young NFL player, I got hurt. I ruptured a patellar tendon. And at the time, there was a guy named Mauro De Pasquale who wrote the anabolic diet, like pretty famous dude in Canada. Mauro hooked me up with my first supplement deal, and he did all my diet stuff. And he's like the father of carb cycling, like 99 level wizard in this stuff, like long before the internet and everybody basically stole his stuff. So Mauro did all my diet. I ended up coming in as a rookie, and I ruptured my patellar tendon. So I'm pretty much done for the season. They tell me I might never play again. As we kind of start going through the rehab, my rehab's really stalled, and it wasn't until introducing me to Charlie Francis that things kind of took off a little bit. But one of the things that Charlie was real big on was always med ball circuits, dissimilar conditioning using the med ball instead of, constantly conditioning using your sport. So I developed a whole series of med ball throws that we still use in all of our training programs that I teach all my athletes in a warm up, and we use at different points and different, light balls, medium balls, heavy balls. And it's pretty amazing over that, 25 years that I've been doing this, the amount of people that naturally understand rotation, especially under load, and then how to basically coil, eccentric, and then be able to flip a switch and throw and land in a good position, not rise up, stay in this, athletic position, toes forward, big toe in the ground, knee tracks over the insteps, be able to load the glutes and be able to come. I mean, it was while I was successful for 10 years in the NFL. And the reason I'm still dynamic is because I do this stuff all the time. I can watch people swing kettlebells. I mean, it's pretty interesting that if you are an observant person and you train every day and you train with different groups of people, you see these glaring weaknesses in people. And I tell them, when you're 20 something, it's not a big deal, but this is going to become something that all of a sudden now you're 40, that you don't have this flexibility, you don't have this rotation. I was also happy to hear you use the word trunk, which has been like my personal, like fucking battle to try to get people to refer to this as a trunk, like an oak tree, instead of like a core, because pears and apples have cores, and I hate the term core. So that idea of like being trunk, because I don't think that people understand the function of the midsection. Really, It's about stabilizing the spine and keeping you upright, and then being able to rotate and move. And it's all about stability, not some form of like extension and flexion. And people wonder why, the U.S. Army goes to this extension, flexion, sit up by, nonstop, and then everybody has back injuries. So the trunk's designed to stabilize. So being able to use this and then be able to load it in different ways, and then also be able to see imbalances from right to left. I think that's the most interesting thing, because injuries don't necessarily happen when something is weak. If one side is weak, it's always the healthy side, the side that's stronger, that ends up carrying the load that gets injured. So the ability to be able to assess injuries and being like, hey, your rotation and your strength on one side is here, and now all of a sudden it's 30% less. We need to bring up this strength, imbalance, so that you don't get injured. So I think for an injury prevention, and then also, like you said, to be able to quantify this as people age, to be able to show them, being like, if these are determining factors for longevity and health, because if you look at actuary tables, the reason people die is they fall, they break a hip, and then they're stuck in bed, and next thing you know, they expire. So your ability to be strong, stable, and be able to move, muscle, we had Gabrielle Lyon on talking about, muscle is the greatest determining factor for longevity. I think it is, but it's almost too easy. But to develop muscle, and more importantly, to stay strong, you have to continue to do things that athletes do. And the problem is we haven't infected, people at, basically people graduate high school and they never do anything athletic again. And then, you ask people like, oh, what do you do for training? I run a marathon or I do a triathlon. Those aren't athletic. It's just basically going in a straight line. So I mean, it's something that we've died on the cross of for over the last, since I started this thing in 2008, is forcing people to find ways to be an athlete for a lifetime. And it's the greatest determining factor for strength and longevity and all the other stuff. Find different ways to use your training and then go out and use it in fun ways.
I mean, we're totally on the same page. I couldn't agree more. One thing that I wanted to note also on the related to the data analysis that we've done recently, and as it relates to aging, I want to just insert this point, which is that when we looked at the differences between men and women as you age and power declines, we dissected those declines by movement type or movement category. And what we found is that rotation declines 20% faster than sagittal plane movements as it relates to power. So power for rotation declines 20% faster than power for sagittal plane movements. So it's like the proof is there that as you get older, those are the movements that decline the most. And that could be a function of physiological changes. It could be a function of that. We think it's probably heavily influenced by the type of training that people do when they get older. That's probably a big contributor, but it's a problem. And we've got a more athletic population, so we suspect that if we look at a much more general population, less athletic population, those differences or those declines are going to be even greater, which is really problematic. As you get older and you're, trying to stop yourself from falling, it's about how quickly can you rotate to stop yourself from falling, right?
Yeah.
It does not matter so much how much weight you can squat. Now, that said, just back to the kind of imbalances piece that you were mentioning. One of the benefits of using Proteus is that, as I mentioned, everything is cloud-based. So you get access to this database, it's new normative data. We say that we have the world's largest database for multiplanar power. And you can compare your results by age, sex, height, weight, sport, position, skill level, and contextualize the results. But one of the things that we found is that from an imbalances standpoint, the main thing is understanding what's normal for you, right? And then secondarily, it's what's normal for the demographic. And when you look at different sports, is when you start to see normal imbalances they vary greatly. So for example, we work with a lot of baseball players, and they notoriously have some of the greatest imbalances right to left side of any sport. Those aren't necessarily bad things, right? There are some imbalances that they have, especially with pitchers. We see pro pitchers, 15, 20% right to left side trunk rotation for plyo and non-plyo type movements. And those are actually some of the things that make them great.
Yeah.
Because they're really good at, explosive movement or accelerating on, for example, non-dominant side trunk rotation for pitching motion is exceptionally important. But understanding where somebody stands is absolutely key. And then tracking those changes over time is enormously important. It's a really, really interesting. We've been saying this a lot recently. It's just a really interesting moment in time where, as I said earlier, these concepts around power specifically are breaking into more mainstream markets and a kind of a general more mainstream understanding of these concepts, which is really, really good to see. And I think as a result, we've seen like strength training surge in popularity over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
To the extent that, I don't know if you know this, but cardio equipment sales have declined like 65% or 62% over the last 3-4 years. So we think that there's a really these are really good trends. And I think what's really important is education around understanding where you stand, understanding what to work on. And what we want to see is we want to see more thoughtful, deliberate decision making around if people are going to invest time in improving themselves, we want them in, spending that time focusing on the things that are actually helping them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the right. I mean, as much as I hate cardio equipment, and the fact that people think jumping on a Peloton is somehow, I don't know, strength training, it seems weird to me. But I think the narrative needs to go to like a balanced approach. Like, do you need to be strong? Yes. Do you need to have a big aerobic base? 100%. Do you need to be able to do rotation and throw? Yeah. I mean, there's a complete training paradigm for athleticism that, like people I don't think can ignore anymore. And I think part of the driver, and I if I could set myself on fire for this, like is like Huberman, and you have the Peter Attias and like this podcast, and finally like these people that are considered. I mean, I come across personally at least one person a week who's trying to like hack Andrew Huberman's podcast by doing everything that he's ever talked about, not realizing that about every 3 podcasts he goes back and kind of contradicts because he's talking about research, and research is always changing. But the one thing that's just universal is if you want to live a long life, muscle's important. You have to eat a high protein diet. You got to lift some weights. You got to have a good aerobic base, because as we, 2 things happen as we age, we lose mitochondrial density. So having that large aerobic base is helpful with the mitochondria. You lose motor unit recruitment. So you have to do something dynamic. You have to lift weights. You have to do something to recruit motor units. So, but it always comes down to you're at the limitation of what you can execute, and more importantly, what you can do safely. Because like I said earlier, the doctors, the PTs, and we work and we train a ton of PTs that come to us because nobody ever taught them how to lift weights. There's no system for that. So bringing these guys in and realizing how deficient we are in that market, because all they're trying to do is get people out of pain, not realizing that if somebody's in pain and you tell them to do nothing, the pain might subside, but you're not doing anything to help them kind of bridge the gap and get past it. So what I thought was interesting for this is you have a way to quantify it. It's a safe way to do things, and people are able to do what they're able to do. Like if you can't generate, max velocity on a rotation, the machine's going to tell you that, and it's going to limit you, opposed from trying to do something that might potentially injure you, or by, going and doing something else. So.
Totally. Yeah. It's, I totally agree. It's one of the reasons that when we built our software, which is like fast evolving and ever evolving, we made a decision to all user accounts are called, you create a user account and it's called an athlete. And we had a kind of internal discussion about this a couple of years ago. We were like, oh, is that gonna, alienate some people who are intimidated because, they don't view themselves as an athlete? And our view is just like everybody is an athlete.
Yeah.
Right.
As long as they're doing something athletic in their training. So yes. That was one of the hard things is when, you go to, we taught, I worked for CrossFit for a number of years, and we'd go to gyms and people referred to their people as athletes because they were in there doing something that, represented or looked like what athletes do. They were running, they were lifting weights, they were in a training facility, they were doing this. And I think people were a little put off, but I liked it because I think, like you said, everybody should be an athlete. There's no excuse to not be, but, and the amount of injuries, it's funny. I get emails every single day from people that are, this injury and this, and it really just comes down to you need to start doing something, and you probably need to lose 20 or 30 pounds. You can lose 20 or 30 pounds and do something, then we can start to have a conversation. But getting somebody to that has been the most difficult piece, which like for your guys' tech, I mean, it's, it's pretty, I mean, I haven't used it, so I'm just watching, videos and trying to understand it. One of the things that at first when I looked at it, I could see rotation, so I could see transverse, I could see sagittal plane, and it took me a little bit to find frontal plane, but it looks like the arm extends this way, so somebody can pull this way, which I thought was interesting. So at least you guys figured out 3 planes of motion, and then, having people move around the machine so that they're orienting their body to it was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It was so just on the technical side, the mechanical system under the hood, it provides for, unencumbered three-dimensional movement. And it doesn't lock you into any plane of motion. It's it adapts to your movement. So what it's doing is it has three different stages. Each stage uh, you know accommodates a kind of a plane of motion, and then there's this one of the stages is this telescoping carbon fiber tube, this arm that's a rigid arm that goes in and out. And we've figured out this very sophisticated way of and it patented this of basically figuring out where you are in space, what direction you are moving, what velocity you're moving, and then being able to send commands to these magnetic brakes that adjust dynamically to provide what feels like a constant load or force that you are encountering throughout any and all range of motion. It's fundamentally unique. And one of the reasons that it has the form factor that it has, like the physical machine, that you need a rigid arm like this carbon fiber tube that we have. You can't do this with a cable machine. You can't do this with a rope. You need this rigid arm to be able to provide forces in any and all directions. And that's one of the many kind of cruxes of the invention that we've come up with. That's been kind of years of development, a couple different iteration cycles, and it's been received super well in the market, and kind of a fast growing category that we're really creating. But I was going to ask you just somewhat of a tangent. Have you read since you're talking about everyone being an athlete, have you read or been following what the Fascial Training Institute is doing, or the new book that Bill Parisi and Jonathan Allen came out with, Fascial Training and Application?
No, I haven't. I years ago ran into a bunch of Parisi speed school guys and got asked to consult for them to try to help them design better strength training programs. But I do know about their overspeed and what they're doing. So what are they doing with fascia? And I hope they're not discussing fascia as a new thing.
No, of course not.
Hey, we found this thing called fascia.
Yeah. We discovered this. Yeah. No, it's. I'll send you a copy of this. It's okay. It is. I highly recommend this. But it's the Fascial Training Institute has been doing some really important work. I think it's mostly around education, and it's bringing, existing and established science, and coupled with some new discoveries around the importance of the fascial system. But one of the points that, and this book is written really well. Jonathan Allen's the writer of it, and does a very good job of, I think, taking pretty complex topics and making them really understandable. So it's actually like that's a deep scientific read, but it's an easy read. And quick plug, of course, there's 2 full chapters on Proteus in there.
Nice.
And it features some of the work and some interviews with some of our scientific advisory board guys, like Bobby Stroop, who trains Patrick Mahomes. We work very closely with Bobby. Eric Cressy, the Cressy Sports Performance. Yep. He was an early adopter of Proteus. He's on our scientific advisory board.
Also been on Power Athlete Radio. So
there you go.
Yeah.
And we have a Cressy performance test in our software that's been done 20,000 times. So that's a 17 movement baseball specific test. A lot of high school, pro, and college athletes have done that one. But we've been working with him a lot on this, and making sense of this data over the years, and translating it to not just programming for baseball players, but beyond, and some incredible work being done there. And also guys like Dr. Andy Galpin,
yep,
who recently joined our scientific advisory board, and someone we're working very closely with on a number of fronts. Andy's excellent. And So in any event, we've worked with some of these folks, and there's some good interviews with a collection of those folks in this book. But one of the most simplified points it makes, I think it starts off talking about um, younger hockey players and some starting off with some anecdotal things about how some of the farm kids that are growing up doing these dynamic activities uh are far exceeding the performance of the players that are hyper specialized and doing just one. That kind of like sets the entire stage and talking about the importance of the fascial system as this you know connected uh web or membrane that is allowing different muscle groups to communicate and ultimately um uh you know enable really efficient movement patterns. And there's some incredible work, and it goes into talking about some of the different tools that are on the kind of the leading edge of both measurement and training, of which Proteus is kind of discussed in both of those realms. But I think that the education around the fascial system, for example, is a really important topic as we're talking about athletes, not just in power development, but in movement quality, movement efficiency, and proprioception and coordination. And it really ties to some of the points that you're making around doing the importance of doing a variety of different movement types, and adopting different training methodologies almost simultaneously or kind of in parallel. We view this all as like there's all these different puzzle pieces, and it's really hard to navigate because there's a lot of information and there's a lot of conflicting stuff out there, but it's hard to keep track of. And so where we fit in is we help make sense of that. And it helps make really efficient, hyper precise, hyper personalized, informed decision making for what should an individual do and why. And that's usually we view that as like the data hub that helps inform exercise, and equipment selection, um, different, health service needs and different tools to use and how to do those movements, whether it's at a high load, low velocity or conversely, moving across the force velocity spectrum, or force velocity curve at a high velocity, low load. So it's really fascinating stuff, and I highly recommend the read.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of irony in this, in that if you look at all these movements, and you made a pretty good connection with like farm kids. I live on a ranch here in Texas. Being able to swing a hammer, chop wood, pick up bales of hay, move rocks, and do all of these movements. These are all movements like, we got a big wood pile, being able to move big stumps of wood. I mean, being able to rotate and throw and be able to. So as I'm looking at all this stuff, I'm like, man, it's like, is this just more indicative of the fact that we've strayed so far from who we are as people? I mean, if you talk about dynamic movement, I mean, the greatest determining factor for any dynamic movement is sprinting. And yet people don't sprint because they run poorly, because they stop running. That's why I recommend, we have a hill in the back of my building that I graded that's, an incline, because I've never seen anybody run uphill poorly. So that's one of the people like, hey, how do I learn to, if I need to start running or I want to sprint, like, where do I start? I'm like, well, start running uphill. And then you can basically transition back once you develop the strength and the stability and all the other key factors, and, strengthen the feet, which is 99% of our contact with this earth is through the feet. So the one question I did have is, everything involves handles. Was there ever a version of this machine that connected to the feet and the hips?
Good question. So we have first of all, we've got a couple different attachments right now. We've got a single hand kind of universal and a two-hand revolving bar. Those attachments, they're easy to clip on and off. again, I want you to experience this firsthand because it'll make a lot more sense. But those can accommodate upper and lower extremity movements. So whether you're, fixing it to, kind of your chest and doing some of these movements, or, basically holding these different handles in different ways. It's a similar way that you could think about, like, well, if you're going to do a kind of a lateral lunging movement, holding a kettlebell, right? You're still holding it with your upper extremities. Um, so it can accommodate a vast array of or spectrum of different movement types with just those. Now we also have kind of a bat type attachment as well, and then in development, something that we're field testing is kind of a hip attachment, and then on the kind of hardware roadmap is expanding further. Um, but again, like, we really don't want it. Proteus can be used really effectively for these very isolated movements, but where it really thrives is the multi-planar full body type movements. And those are ones that you don't necessarily want uh, something that's restrictive in a sense. But yes, it's kind of on the roadmap to be developing or expanding that suite of attachments to just allow for more versatility on top of something that is just kind of infinitely versatile as it is.
Yeah, I have a client that I work with that's local here who's pretty well to do, and he likes buying fitness technology companies. And so we've gone out and looked at a bunch of different of these kind of at home kind of, like the mirror type thing where you can kind of get this cable-y kind of hook up. And, people are trying to figure out how you can get people to lift weights in an apartment without really loading it in different ways. And so we looked at a ton of these, and always my thing is always goes back to there's no way to work on any rotation. There's no way to really, quantify dynamic movement with, cables. I mean, you can do some compensatory acceleration, but at the end of the day, you have to overcome things. And it's an interesting tech. I mean, realistically, the only limitation is probably size and cost for the average consumer. It's probably a little cost prohibitive for, maybe the average Joe that wants to put it in their house, and it's, takes up a fairly decent sized footprint. But I don't know how you necessarily build this machine without having some weight to it. You were talking about carbon fiber shafts, but like looking at like the footprint, you get big, strong people on there, and doesn't have the ability to be able to withstand somebody trying to drive and move it. Then it kind of negates it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not many ways around reducing footprint. There are some, but there's trade-offs with, what you sacrifice. But at the end of the day, like, you can't do what we do. You can't measure multiplanar, and you can't optimally train it with a cable machine. Now that said, we don't view ourselves as like competing with a cable machine, and we don't necessarily compete with at-home products. And in fact, we're big fans of a lot of the tools and tech that's out there. I think because of our unique and differentiated capabilities, we are, we have a position of confidence where we're like, we love this evolving ecosystem. We have our own place that's just essential at the kind of the center of it. Now, that said, how Proteus interfaces with, we've got a couple of high-end residential installs. Not many, but it's not a huge focus for us. But somebody has the space, we definitely recommend it. But where this really plays with those equipments, I mentioned earlier that this is the data hub that informs how you should train, what exercises to do, and what equipment to use.
Sure.
In a hyper personalized way. So 5 minutes full body, and then output a program. There's nothing like it. So what we see often is actually people will go into Proteus location and get a test done, and they'll either send the test results to their trainer, or they'll just walk away with it on their own, and they'll use that to determine, what should I do at home. And one of the new features or product extensions that we've recently developed, I mentioned earlier, is that I made this point that like, new data, especially exciting new data like this, that's, fills this big historical void in data around this incredibly important pillar of human performance. Is it's really exciting, but if it's not actionable, nobody cares, right?
Yeah.
And so we have taken this, it's years of development, but we've recently launched this version of this, you get the test results, but it's not just a dead end. You can output a hyper personalized training program. And one of the things that we've done is we've started working in golf. We have an early adopter of Proteus, one of our early customers that had a Proteus 1.0 and then upgraded to a 2.0. And he's over the last couple of years, he's worked with, I think, 750 golfers, and he's used a TrackMan, Proteus, K-Vest, and force plates. And then he whittled it down to a Proteus and a TrackMan. And he established that there are 8 Proteus metrics that correlate directly with club head speed. He developed a system where he can create training programs to manipulate those metrics, which will then yield improvements in club head speed, to the extent that he started a business where people will come in for a 5-minute Proteus test or an eval, and he'll use just the test results and create a hyper-personalized 12-week training program that he sells $250. That training program can be done using free weights and cables, and it yields a 5 to 10 mile an hour increase in club head speed, which is a huge increase. He's got several hundred of these customers, but what we did is we've been working with him for a couple of years while he's been building his business around this. We've recently built his brain into our software. So you do a golf swing speed test on Proteus, 5 minutes, press a button, and you get an email with a link to a checkout page that takes you to your program that's delivered through a partner mobile application. We're using Team Builder right now.
Sure.
And that program can be done using free weights and cables. People will go in for a Proteus test, buy a golf program for $250 that they can walk away with on mobile and do that program remotely. So do it at home using their basic training equipment or tools that they may have. They don't have to have access to a Proteus to train on. And what this has led to is the beginnings of, it's almost like a fitness vending machine. And we're turning this into this product extension that puts a world-class trainer's brain in your pocket. And as I mentioned before, this is the data hub that informs, in an automated sense, how you should train and what you should do. And we're starting with golf with this very proven system, this a programmatic system for creating programs, but we're soon going to be expanding to other sports and beyond, leveraging some of these world-class elite trainers that are already on our scientific advisory board and basically building their brains, their methodology, their decision-making into our software to make elite level training accessible.
Yeah. I mean, it's smart. I mean, if you can set up, a set of standardized tests that somebody can do. And, what's cool is it's because the tech is standardized and it's your guys' obviously proprietary tech, they can do the diagnostic, they can do the training, and then they can come back and see whether or not they improved. But then they also have the application of going out on the golf course and can they hit the ball more? I'm not a golfer. I'm always amazed by the amount of time and execution, and it's just like anything. There's so much nuance into it. Like I was watching, I love seeing technique, right? Like I'm like obsessed with like people moving well, and they were showing John Daly when he was young, his swing in relation to everybody else's swing, and his flexibility and ability to get the club face actually facing him and then come back around. And he got so much rotation that it was something like he had like another 9 inches of like head rotation. So while he was able to hit the ball so dynamically, it was just because he was just such a unique swing. And then you watch him go out there and drink like, basically a bottle of vodka, and he's out there playing in no shoes and he's killing these dudes. I mean, it just goes to show you that, is golf athletic? Well, I mean, that guy's like the argument could be made a million different ways, but it's still.
Well, he's really good at doing that thing that is his job.
Yeah,
right?
like I've never seen him shoot hoops. I don't know if he can play basketball. Right. I can't see him juggle, or I don't know, but I guarantee he's probably pretty good at anything that you want to do that looks like a bar game. Like he's going to kill you in shuffleboard. If you're going to play any type of bar game, he's probably pretty good. But yeah, I mean that. Anytime you can take athletes in and put them into a standardized test, and I'm not a over big fan of like the EMS and some of the functional movement screens and whatnot, but you can put them into something, put them into a training program, bring them back and test them is good. But the other issue comes down to, and I think as strength coaches and people that are in the performance field, you get so romanced with numbers. I'm training, two of the top Brazilian jiu-jitsu players in the world that were leaving tomorrow to go to Vegas for ADCC and CGI, which are like the, ADCC is like the biggest grappling tournament in the world. And there's another one too going on. We've been training 2 years for this. And while they made extensive performance progress in the weight room in terms of strength and all these other factors, at the end of the day, did it make them better, grapplers? Are they better at jiu-jitsu? Are they able to do things in their sport that they weren't able to do? So for me, I can get super excited about like, oh, this guy's now he has a double body weight back squat. He can do, look at all the things they can do. And they went from 3 pull-ups to 15 pull-ups, and you can quantify all these numbers. But at the end of the day, if they don't perform on the mat and they aren't better, then was it worth it? Did it help them? And so that's one of the interesting things as this technology comes out and becomes more and more kind of accessible. You bring up Patrick Mahomes. He was already pretty fucking good before he found your technology. Right. But now all of a sudden, if he's able to, what's he like 28 years old?
Yeah,
I think it's like, I like the fact that, I played for the Chiefs, but the fact that he's only 28, like I've been hearing his name for so long, and he's obviously in the conversation with the Tom Brady's of the world. So, but like seeing him now as he's kind of approaching 30 and starts going across, if he's able to maintain that level of play at that high level for as long as we're expecting him to, things like this technology and his trainer and all these other things just become more and more ingrained. And hey, this is what he's done. This is how we're able to measure. And we know that he's not falling off as much as other people are. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a, we've always taken, like I said early on, we've grown organically and just through word of mouth primarily. So we've done very little marketing, and a lot of almost all of our sales are just inbound who will come in through our website, which is a great place to be. But we've been super conservative about, there's a lot of noise in this space, right? There's a lot of flash in the pan stuff. And to the extent that, there are so many companies, even when I started this company in 2016, I bootstrapped it for 18 months prior to that. I've been conceptualizing this since 2013, really. It wasn't until 2015 I left my full-time job, bootstrapped it, and then founded the company in 2016. But there's been so many companies that have come and gone since even when we started, and we've always viewed ourselves as an outlier in the sense that like, this is not a gimmick, this is not a toy, this is something that's here to stay. We're really just getting started. We've been very conservative about like marketing this as a the one and only thing that's going to change your entire life, right? As a lot of companies do, right? Because they're just there's a lot of risk of credibility loss by people saying like, okay, you're associated with one athlete's performance, and so we see a lot of like inappropriate claims of like, oh, we're the reason that this athlete is so successful. And the point about Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes is like a freak of a human being, right? He always has been, and he always will be. And are we the reason for his success? No, but we certainly are helping, and that's undeniable. And I think when you start to map out like, well, who are the other athletes that are using this? And let's look at the golf space. Well, we got John Rahm is a big user of Proteus. Bryson DeChambeau is a big user of Proteus. From Justin Verlander to Damian Lillard, and we're starting to get into the MMA space a little bit more, which is super, super exciting. But the proof's in the pudding. And anybody that claims that they're the reason for an athlete's success is it's just total bullshit. And we like to be really cautious about that. But at the end of the day, we think that the technology that works and produces results is going to be here to stay. We're one of those tools. And, we don't really have to do much selling about that because it's just the proof is just there. So that's a really good place to be. But what we do like is that the forward-thinking athletes that are really talented, like Mahomes, who are benefiting from using our tools from both a measurement and a training standpoint, are, the example of Mahomes is like he's got this very, very narrow, I think Bobby Stroop tells us like 3% right to left side trunk rotation, quote unquote imbalance, which is a really small, basically negligible one. His ability to rotate and his hip shoulder separation is unbelievably good, powerful. It's like one of the keys for his ability to move the way that he does, to be able to find a path in whatever situation or circumstance that he's in, to be able to do his job.
Well, most quarterbacks, right-handed quarterbacks, when they go to their right, and their ability to throw back across their body is a determining factor for success, especially as an offensive lineman. If you can play with a quarterback that can roll out to his right, step, and actually rotate and throw back across the field, that's a pretty powerful thing. And then even worse, even better, if they can go to their left with their right hand, rotate and throw back across their body to the right side of the field. Like, we run, West Coast offense runs sprint right and sprint left option. Sprint right option, everybody goes left, and then the quarterback goes right and throws. And it's a classic. I mean, it's anytime they're down on the goal line and you see them, everybody go left and Mahomes go right and he throws to Kelsey across, cutting across. It's called sprint right option. Sprint left option, we all go right, and the quarterback rolls. They don't use it that much because very few quarterbacks can roll to their left and then rotate and throw across your body. Mahomes can do all of these, and he does it effortlessly. The other thing, which has always been really impressive, I've seen him in some positions where he gets hit, where he looks like he gets rolled up. And if it was Tom Brady, he would have broken into 1,000 pieces. Mahomes will like bend back and then get up and be fine. And I'm always amazed at like his flexibility, his ability to like, once he gets into those situations. And it's, the only way I can describe it is if you're ever in the bottom of a pile or a whole bunch of people hit you at once, you almost have to like tell your mind like Gumby is what I used to say to myself. I'd be like Gumby, and I would just kind of like relax and just like kind of let it happen, because if you fight against it, all of a sudden now you tear things. There were times I got rolled up in the pile and I just kind of, you just go dead fish, Gumby, whatever it is. I've seen him get bent over where I've been like, oh, like he's not getting up out of that one, and the guy pops up. So I think what's fascinating though, I mean, he's in his 20s. As he continues to age, if he can maintain that strength and flexibility and all of these like intangibles, it's made him, one of the, best to ever do the game. I mean, he's on track for, whatever he wants to do in this game. So, but as he ages, and I think where strength conditioning becomes more important is not necessarily for the 23, 24, 25-year-old pro athlete. It's now all of a sudden when you're 29, 30, 32, and you start going on and you get older, are you able to do the same things that you were able to do when you were younger? I mean, obviously not your tending to age, but if you continue to, train at a high degree, not let yourself get out of shape, hopefully, resist injury. And if you do get injured, deal with it quickly. I think it's a longevity play. And that's, I had some interesting revelations about my own NFL career. Over the course of my 10 years, I felt like I lost athleticism. And it was, I wasn't able at the end of my career to do what I physically could do early on. And it was really the power behind Power Athlete, and really just this idea of fostering, developing athleticism. I mean, that's the technology that I've been teaching for a number of years. Is like, here's the components of athleticism and here are the pieces. And if you break the pieces down and you reassemble it, then you're a more athletic version of yourself. Whereas for a long time, people thought athleticism was just, the hand of God makes you athletic and you're not. No, it's actually a set of movements that you're able to do better than other people. It's like reading. Certain people can read better than others. Other people can arrange X, Y, and Z axis and do all this stuff down the field. But over the course of my career, I felt like I lost athleticism and I couldn't figure out why. And it wasn't until I started working with a guy named Craig Bueller who's been on this podcast and a good friend of mine for a long time. But the idea that as you get injured, muscles stop working the same way that they used to, and that you have to continue to, be able to evolve your training and be able to find different ways to do it. And, the simple pounding that you did maybe when you're 18, 20, 22 years old is not the same training that you need to do when you're in your 30s. Do you need to lift weights? Yes, but it has to evolve. Whereas I think the margin of error as you age, especially get injured and, the play, I guess you could say like the play volume goes up, that margin of error gets very, very tight, and you have to be much smarter in your training. And I think what happened for me is, I was always very strong. And so that became kind of a factor for me. And the training was good. But as I aged, I lost athleticism. And I think being able to do things like what you're talking about in terms of fostering, developing athleticism, finding different ways to assess athletes where, all of a sudden, let's say 2 years from now, Mahomes comes in and that strength deficit isn't 3%, it's 25%. Now, all of a sudden, he's like, I still feel fine, but why is this so far off? And now you have to, it's kind of a canary in the coal mine moment. So as I'm looking at this, there would be a situation where if I was a GM of a team, you have a technology like this, you put everybody through day one diagnostics, you keep the numbers, and then periodically through the year, you do the diagnostics to see, if somebody's really fallen off, why is he falling off? How can we help this person? Because we're going to need this guy late in the season. So that's how I view a lot of these different technologies in terms of setting a diagnostic. And, and it's also good too, that not only is a diagnostic a lot of the tests, but you're also really constrained by the limitations and the creativity of the coach and somebody being able to understand it in a holistic manner and how they assemble it into a training program and what is frequency and volume and intensity and all the other factors. And then being able to have other, performance metrics so that we know that, hey, this thing is working in the way that it is based upon the sport. So it's exciting. Totally. It's exciting, dude. Yeah. I think you're doing something pretty cool.
For sure. One of the observations that we've made, we're working with some of these world-class athletes and this is not, necessarily profound, but I think it's an important observation to make, which is that we see that a lot of the elite level athletes are able to find it's not necessarily that if you look at their performance tests on Proteus, for example, it's not necessarily that every one of the movements that they perform is off the charts good. But there are certainly certain movements, depending on the athlete, that are off the charts. And it might be a deceleration, it might be acceleration. Like John Rahm, we've found has got one of the most incredible deceleration metrics that we've found on Proteus for his shot put type movement. And that's one of the things that is one of the biggest benefits of his swing. But everyone's got their own kind of unique characteristics. But I think the key part is that a guy like Mahomes, they're able to find many, many different ways to organize their body to produce a trajectory or a movement, right? And that's one of the things that makes them resilient to injury. So for example, the example that you're using on going from a 3% bilateral trunk rotation power right to left side difference to a 25%, what that would show us was something that there's going to be a deficiency that he's developing on one side, which is going to narrow the number of options that he has to self-organize his body to be able to withstand injury or be able to manipulate and kind of organize or contort himself to not just perform a task, but to prevent himself from getting injured. And I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and the things that my 2-year-old, for example, is able to do from a contortion standpoint is unbelievable. Like it constantly impresses me where he's doing things where I'm like, that would break my body in half. But like, never mind that, even at that age, they still have more bones than an adult human. I think as you get older, the number of options that you have for being able to really manipulate and move your body to perform a task or to get out of a situation it just gets limited. And that then means that then means that as you get older, it's incredibly important to continuously be doing a wide variety of different activities.
Yeah.
And as you get older, I think the worst thing that you can do is specialize, right? Or just focus on one or two different things. It's all about a variety, and that means variety of training, different exercise types across the entire force velocity spectrum. And if there's one thing that you should be doing, it's focus on rotation.
Yeah.
And it's beyond just rotational strength, it's speed and power.
We had Dr. Sabine Hazen on the podcast. She's a pretty prolific gut researcher, and on the podcast she made an interesting point that the healthiest people on the planet can eat the most diverse diet. So due to the robustness and really just like the adaptability of like the immune system in the gut, like the healthiest people on the planet can eat the most diverse stuff. If you can only digest one macronutrient, like that is, even though you're healthier than you were before, that's not indicative of health. Like that just means that you're band-aiding something that is a bigger problem. And so the same thing with athleticism and training and movement, that if you just do one thing and this is all I can do, that's a real problem. CrossFit was pretty sharp in that, the idea of, being able to do a wide variety, like not specializing, and this kind of idea of like being generally good at a lot of different tasks. A lot of that stems from actually Art Devaney wrote something called Evolutionary Fitness. And that was really, I read that a number of years ago. And that idea of like, you should be able to lift, you should be able to run and be able to do a combination of different movements. Like you should be able to go out on your, ranch and chop wood and not hurt yourself. You should be able to, load hay. Just all of the tasks that like humans are designed to do. And we are designed to rotate. We're designed to be on one leg and two legs, and really just going back and looking at this evolutionary model as a function of health. And, and then like, you look at, let's say, conventional bodybuilding. Yeah. If you're looking at trying to put on muscle, stability is a key factor. If you can add stability to a movement, like if I sit down on a machine and I can push to failure, I have a greater chance of putting on hypertrophy more so than trying to balance a movement. But there's also something inherent about the balance and your ability to generate strength through using balance that fosters and develops athleticism. So if your goal is just hypertrophy, are you doing anything to foster and develop athleticism? Good chance you're not, because the most advantageous way to put on hypertrophy doesn't necessarily foster and develop this. So it's a kind of an interesting space, especially in the fitness industry, where you have people, like I said, Gabrielle Lyon talking about, muscle's a great determining factor. Much like Dr. Hazen's comment, like, yes, it's everything. You need to be able to eat a diverse diet. You need to be able to do a diverse amount of movements. Like, should you be able to run? Should you have aerobic capacity to be able to, go out and hike for 45 minutes with a, 60-pound vest? Yes. Should you be able to lift weights? Yes. Should you be able to swing a kettlebell and do all these? I would hope that I had never used your technology, but I should show up and I should be able to do everything and be able to get some meaningful feedback, because that means that I've been doing something in the training that is similar to what I'm going to see. Now, if I come in and I basically abort everything I do and it's a complete fucking travesty train wreck, then I, as a human, have to go back and say, am I doing something that's going to benefit me? And, that's, I'm pretty fortunate in that I, started training those jits guys. So I started doing jujitsu, and that's really fascinating for me because, it's obviously, different planes of motion, supine, prone, up, down, all this kind of like gyroscope type of movements. And it's pretty interesting to see the people that have been doing it since they were kids. Like, they still move very well. The people that are 40 years old that start doing this stuff, me included, there's a steep learning curve, and the people that are fairly athletic and trained and do a lot of different movements pick it up much faster than people that don't. So I get a lot of questions on people like, hey, I'm 40, I started doing jujitsu. How do I progress? And my question is always like, what have you been doing leading up to this? Nothing. It's going to be a steep learning curve. And so what I like about this is, a diagnostic to be able to get people back to doing something that looks like some form of athletic training, which I think we've kind of steered off, and I'm happy you guys are championing this. If people want to try this and they're excited about it, like, is there a resource on the website to be able to let them know where facilities are, or they can try this technology?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So Proteus Motion, I mean, our website is good resources across the board. ProteusMotion.com, Proteus motion.com. For finding locations, we have a program for our partner sites. It's for certified sites. It's like an affiliate program. And we've got a trainer certification as well, but you can access, if you hit the blue button on our website, it says request a demo, just fill out your information, say you're an athlete looking for the nearest Proteus, and it will take you to a location finder map near you for those affiliate sites. And then if you're interested in actually acquiring the technology, speaking to a member of the sales team, click that same button and just say that you're a facility owner or trainer looking to learn more about the technology, and then you'll set up a very short meeting with one of our sales team members who's an expert on the technology. And I highly, highly recommend, don't just go to the website and peruse around. If you're going to spend 15 minutes, just talk to somebody on our team. I can guarantee it's going to be highly informative, highly interesting, and you will see and learn things that you didn't know but need to know. So definitely recommend that.
I just filled out the contact page, and it took me to, looks like you got 2 units in Houston, but none in Austin.
I think we do have some units in Austin, but I don't think that they're in the affiliate program yet. We do this in kind of batches. So we can connect offline, and I can make the I can make the connection. But we're in, I think 48 states now, and US and Canada. We've got a really good presence. I think we're within a 30-minute drive of 80% of the population of the US. So it's pretty accessible. We do like to make a separation, though, because this is such a new, such a different kind of new animal. It's a new category that we're creating. We have a trainer certification, and we have it's kind of a site certification for this ambassador or affiliate program. Those are the ones that we feature on our website because those are the ones that have been part of the first cohort of vetted sites that we're comfortable of. They know how to introduce this to somebody new, and those are the ones that are on this kind of location finder map. Got some awesome partners.
Well, no, I look forward to giving it a shot. But, you gave us a website, you gave us the Instagram. So if people want to learn more information about it, you just reach out, and hopefully you can find one near you and go give it a try and put your training to the test. So, dude, thank you so much for coming on. It was extremely informative, and I think it's an exciting piece of technology.
Really appreciate it. Love the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by kofi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.